Hi, guys. Let's make sure. Today, as we are reading, we're looking at, you probably even want to open it up in Google Classroom, your journal entry page. And let's really think about comparing and contrasting, right? How can we compare characters? Like yesterday, when somebody checked in, we had a good discussion about we can make the connection and the comparison between Hank and our new character, Uncle Zhang, who are getting into trouble, not necessarily with the law, where Hank was in trouble with the law and Uncle Zhang is now in trouble with the loan shark. So they have a connection, a comparison that we can make between the two. So see if you can do that today, or a contrast with two of the characters. Uncle Zhang had borrowed $500 from some loan sharks when he first came to America, just as Uncle Ming had. It wasn't even for myself, it was for my mom back home. She was very sick, I thought. He could barely finish. You maybe you thought maybe if you paid for an expensive doctor, she might get better, I said. You thought maybe if you paid for an expensive doctor, she might get better, my dad said, glancing at my mom. My mom slipped her hand into his. Uncle Zhang shook his head. It wasn't even that. She had stage 4 cancer. It had already spread. There was nothing they could do, he said. So then, his eyes grew moist, his voice shaky. I borrowed the money so she could die knowing her only son was okay out there, that I had made it in America instead of being a loser. Uncle Zhang started crying. Listen to me, you're not a loser, my dad said. None of us knew it was going to be like this. I couldn't even say goodbye. Uncle Zhang bit down on his lower lip. I was afraid if I called her, she'd hear it in my voice how much I was struggling, so I refused. No matter how many times she asked for me in the end, I refused to get on the phone with her. My mom put a hand on Uncle Zhang's shoulder. None of us said a word. I sat very still, thinking about my own secrets that I was keeping from my parents. My missing pencil, the C minus lurking in my closet. I thought about my parents and how they almost never wanted to call or write to my grandparents or Shen's family. And if we called them, my mother always rushed off to get off the phone. Either that or she'd put on the same voice she used at Macy's when she said, just looking. As the hazy sky turned into the night, my parents, Uncle Zhang, and I gazed out the window, thinking of all the things we wanted to say to our parents, but we couldn't. In the middle of the night, I got out of bed and went over to my mom and dad's bed. My dad was snoring peacefully. I hesitated just for a second. He got so little sleep, my dad, before shaking him awake. Dad, I whispered. Huh? Did a customer come? He asked, jerking his eyes open and sitting up. I'll be right there. No, 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 Dad, it's just me. I said, I can't sleep. I keep thinking about Uncle Zhang and his passport. I know, my dad sighed. Me too. What's he going to do? I don't know, honey, my dad said. Hopefully he can meet someone who can help him. Like who? A lawyer, maybe? My dad said. What can a lawyer do for him? I asked. My dad thought about it. A lawyer will be able to tell his employer what's what, he said. Well, why can't we tell people what's what? I asked him. He chuckled. We can, sweetheart. But nobody's going to listen to us, he said. That's not true, I thought. Hank's new employer, he listened. My dad rolled back on his side. There's nothing you can do, sweetheart, he said. Now try to get some sleep. I went back to my room, but I didn't get some sleep. Instead, I pulled out a piece of paper from my drawer and Mrs. T's big old dictionary thesaurus, which I still had from when I wrote Hank's letter. With a flashlight, I started writing. And so this is where she writes a letter again. Dear employer, I am writing to you about your employee, Zhang Ling. Mr. Zhang has informed me that you are in possession of his passport and ID. It is illegal to confiscate someone's passport and ID. I request your immediate return of Mr. Zhang's passport and ID. Failure to do so will result in serious consequences. I will be following up with Mr. Zhang to see if you have returned his passport and ID. Thank you for your attention. Sincerely, Mia Tang, lawyer. I worked on the letter all night long, making sure the tone, punctuation, and syntax was all right. I read it over 5 times, and when I'm pretty sure I had corrected all the grammatical mistakes, I copied it onto a clean sheet of white paper. Before I left for school, I handed Uncle Zhang the letter. This is for you, I told him. I don't know if it'll work, but it's worth a shot. I watched as his eyes danced across my writing. You wrote this? He asked. Well, I had a thesaurus, I said. Mia, this is incredible, he said. I blushed. I hope it works for you, Uncle Zhang, I said, hugging him. Me too, he said, clutching the letter. Me too. So think about what Mia did in that chapter, right? Can you compare it to anything else she's done or anybody she's done it for? And that could be your journal entry today. We're going to read one more chapter. You only have to do one journal entry, but you could also make a comparison with this chapter as well, or a contrast, a difference. Uncle Zhang left. We got a call from one of the other immigrants. He had been over to Mrs. Robinson's house, and the stolen neon green Ford Thunderbird was not there. I looked down at my lucky jeans and thought, whew. With the car officially nowhere to be found, I felt it was only appropriate I personally tell the owner, Mr. Lorenz. So I opened up the ledger, looked up his phone number, and gave him a call. When he didn't pick up, I glanced at his address and was surprised to see that he lived right here in Anaheim, a couple of blocks from my school, actually. After school, Lupe and I went over to his house. Mr. Lorenz lived in a small yellow house on Orange Avenue. We walked up and knocked on the door. Hello, Mr. Lorenz, I called. Anyone home? Lupe cupped her hands and tried to peer through the window. We heard rustling and footsteps. Finally, the door opened a crack. Who's asking? Mr. Lorenz said. It's me, Mia, the girl from the Cala Vista. Where your car got stolen. I said. And this is my friend, Lupe. Lupe waved at Mr. Lorenz. Hey, she said. Can we come in? I asked him. Mr. Lorenz didn't let us in right away. He paused to think about it, and then finally he sighed and undid the chain in his door. His house had a funky smell, like somebody had been cooking stinky tofu and forgot to open the window. Lupe wrinkled her nose as we took a seat on the couch. This better be quick, Mr. Lorenz said. Don't worry, this will only take a minute, I said. I just wanted to come over and tell you personally that we can't find your car. That's okay, the insurance company has already caught me, he said. I know, but it's still important, you know? Is that it? Mr. Lorenz snapped. Just then we heard a loud vroom. A car came speeding down the road and parked right out in front of Mr. Lorenz's house. We glanced out the windows. Our eyes stretched when we registered the color. Neon green. Hey, isn't that? Lupe asked. Yes. Yes, it was. It was the neon green Thunderbird. The neon green Thunderbird. The driver of the car got up and walked up to the house. He turned the doorknob. Hey, man, you said the car was in perfect condition, but the windshield's got all these dents in it, the guy said, tossing the keys to Mr. Lorenz. And then he looked at us. Who are you? He asked. We're just, Lupe said. Leaving, I announced. I grabbed Lupe's hands and lunged for the door, but Mr. Lorenz was quicker than me. He slammed the door shut with one hand. Not so fast, he said. Where do you think you two are going? Home, I said. I glanced at Lupe. Sweat beads were falling like raindrops from her forehead. We gotta go home and do our homework, right, Lupe? Yeah, we have a lot of homework. And when you're done doing your homework, what are you going to say? Mr. Lorenz asked. He leaned into us as I could feel the hair rising on my neck. About what you saw. My breath caught in my throat. Nothing, I said. I didn't see anything. Me neither, Lupe said. He stared at us. Desperately, I tried to erase my thoughts so he couldn't read them. Good. His wet lips twisted into a smirk. He stared at us desperately. I tried to erase my thoughts so he couldn't read them. Good, he said. His wet lips twisted into a smirk. He crouched down and whispered into our ears, breathe a word about this to anyone, and I will come find you. The threat grabbed me and smothered me as I ran all the way home. Whew. So think about how that ended today, and what do you think Lupe is going to do? Okay, so not only Lupe, but Mia. What are they going to do now that they found what truly happened to the car? All right. So make sure you do your journal entry for Wednesday, do your read to self journal entry for Wednesday, and then go back into the slides or the Seesaw assignment with the slides for each subject today. And make sure you check out the list of everything to do. Have a great rest of your day.